Bizarre Brain Comics. Hello, my comic book friends, and welcome to Bizarre Brain Comics. This is where I like to take a look at some older comics. I'll take a look at the characters and creators, and then examine the stories and the art. I had a brain freeze for a moment. I couldn't think. Okay, this time I want to take a look at this book right here. This is Strange Tales, Volume 3, Number 1 from 1994. It's actually a one-shot. And it was written, it's basically, it's a one-shot. It's, the story is, 40-some, 50 pages long? I've forgotten how many pages. So it's basically a graphic novel. It's just done in the, at the standard comic book dimensions. It is square bound. With wonderful printing and quality paper being printed on. And this is one of the few times I think it's well worth it because of the great story and the great art. Oftentimes in the past and even today, they have comics are printed on with more expensive printing on the more expensive paper, and they're just not worth it, either the art or the story, or often I just think the story isn't worth it, even though the art may very well be. For most of the more recent stuff that I have gotten, I would just assume it were printed on more the old-fashioned way on lower quality paper, because the stories just are not necessarily worth it, especially when I won't get into all that. But okay, and this was written by Kurt Busiek, I guess how you pronounce it, and the art the whole thing is fully painted by Ricardo Villagran. And I don't know much about Villagran. I haven't seen a whole lot of his. I like this one and a Khazar graphic novel, and probably some other stuff that I can't think of off the top of my head. But it is some really good art. Now, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Strange Tales itself. It's was a long-running title. Now, the title Strange Tales, the original Volume 1 ran from, not concurrently, but ran from 1951 to, was it 78? I think it said 78. And when it started, it was one of the pre-code horror books. And so with that long run, it changed quite a bit over the years. Of course, it started out as horror, got into some of the strange or unusual science fiction stories, had some of the giant monster stories. Of course, it started in Atlas, and it had some of the Atlas era giant monster and similar type stories in it. And then in the 60s, of course, it was an anthology title, and then in the 60s, it became a long-running home for Doctor Strange as one part of the book, and various other characters in the other part, having some from the Fantastic Four, solo stories of the Thing and solo stories of the Human Torch, and sometimes they were together. And then also some very popular Nick Fury Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. stories, including the much sought after Jim Steranko era. But then beginning with issue 169, I think it was, the title was changed to Doctor Strange. And he took over the entire book. And it ran for a couple years or so like that. And then they stopped that. Doctor Strange started over with an issue number 1. And then Strange Tales came back, picking up with issue 169. And in that iteration had various other characters. I guess had what's her name? Sometime in there had some Adam Warlock, various other things. I think Cloak and Dagger. That might have been in a later in volume 2. I don't know. Cloak and Dagger. Some other stuff. Straight superhero stuff. And then since then, even since this one, they have had other Strange Tales. But one of the neat things about this one, it's well written. I really enjoy it. Is that it features the characters from that era, 60s era Strange Tales title. With of course, it says featuring the Thing, Doctor Strange, and the Human Torch. But Nick Fury also makes a cameo, and it also involves some giant monster stuff. And it's all one story, but it's one story composed of little bits of other stories. But before we take a look in there, I'm going to tell you a little bit here. Okay, Kurt Busiek. He was born in 1960. And the boy's about my age. He's an American comic book writer, and whose works include, most notably, Marvel's Astro City and Superman, among others. He was Boston-born. Busiek didn't read comics in his childhood. I guess his parents didn't approve and they didn't allow him to. And I know about that, not from my personal experience, but I had a friend who was the same way. He loved comics, but because his mother had remembered all the stuff in the 50s, thought comics caused juvenile delinquency. So he'd come over and he'd read my comics, or he'd borrow a stack of comics and hide them and go out in the garage to read them. Stuff like that. But he didn't read comics in his childhood until about the age of 14. As he grew, he and a friend, Scott McCloud. Who's Scott McCloud? Yeah, Scott McCloud of Understanding Comics fame. Worked on their own comics, and they contributed to fanzines and was an avid letter writer to the comics. So his stuff appeared a lot in many of the letter columns. Okay, during his senior year in college, he submitted sample scripts to Dick Giordano at DC. And he later got to write some backup stories. Later he moved to Power Man and Iron Fist. And then he did a Red Tornado limited series. And he had a big milestone with Alex Ross on Marvel's in '93. Of course, he's written so many other good things. Astro City. He really is a very, very fine comic book writer. And I'm not going to get into Ricardo Villagran. I don't know much about him, but I plan on researching him for a later project. So let's kind of take an abbreviated look inside Strange Tales. Okay, here you see this great painted cover. The whole thing is painted. This is by Ricardo Villagran. Now this is very, very shiny cover. And why is that? That's because, I wanted to show you this here, if you haven't seen this before. Whoo! Yes! The protective outer cover is clear plastic cover, so that you can open it and get to see the beautiful cover illustration without the masthead. And then the back cover is the same way. It has all that stuff, but then you get to see this great illustration here. And this makes it a little difficult, so yeah, I'm going to have to go back to the other way. Yep. This is, I'm going to have to go back to do it this way, just because I forgot that being square bound, it's... So here you get to see kind of a sample of the pencil drawing morphing into the fully painted stuff. That's cool. Doctor Strange, Strange Tales. And it starts off with Nick Fury right in the midst of trouble. Well, he's not really. He's telling a story. It turns out it's a poker game with Torch, Thing, and Fury, and one other who we don't see till later. And they're playing pokers and telling stories, swapping tall tales. Well, they're not necessarily tall tales. And Fury's story comes to an end, and then the Thing and Torch tell the story that happened to them, in which they're called to, what was it, in Arizona? Their friend Wyatt Wingfoot is having some problems out at the reservation. He is the chief of the Kiwazi tribe. You can see this beautiful, beautiful artwork. See if you can get close enough. You can see some of the texture, the brush strokes. I mean, I would stop and sometimes and just look so closely at that it's a pleasure just to look at the brushwork and the coloring and stuff. And so they're going to help try to find some missing kids, and they have to wind up camping out at night. And then in the midst of the story, there's another story. Wyatt Wingfoot tells a story, and of course each story has a different color on the paper. So Strange Tales, and this is Torch telling a story about them, and thing that happened to them in New York when they were in the early days of the Fantastic Four, and somehow alligators were coming out of the sewers in droves and crawling right out of the toilet here, and the door. I mean, look at this beautiful way he has depicted the Torch here, and some of those look like there's figures were swiped directly from the original Human Torch illustrations from the 40s. It's more of an homage than a swipe per se, just from the way it looks. And then they meet the Golden Gator, who's down in the sewers and all this stuff. And they fight and defeat him, and suddenly the Golden Gator is gone. All the other gators are gone, and they don't know what the heck was going on. Then, after they're done telling the story, suddenly here's a modified version of the Golden Gator suddenly appears, and he's not here. It's really nice work there. And they have to fight it, and then Doctor Strange pops up. He had detected some mystical energies, things happening he sought it out, the source, which was here, and then that critter disappears, fades away. And he has a story to tell, strange tales, about something that had happened in New York. This is in her earlier days. You can tell by his appearance here. His earlier days would have been when he was in Strange Tales. Someone came to him for some help. Something weird is happening. Again, it's something that he had mentioned in passing, and then came to life. And the thing with the gators was, had overheard someone talking about gators in the sewers, and then they were attacked by the gators. And this guy had mentioned something in passing and was attacked by, and it came to life. I can't remember exactly what it was. And man, this had caused the death of someone in the process, but Doctor Strange apparently defeated it. And then we were back at the camp, and see, because they had been talking about the Golden Gator, and a modified version of the Golden Gator appeared. So something was going on, and then they're doing some more investigating into records of the Kiwazi tribe, and in the process, when Wyatt Wingfoot tells a story about something that happened with his grandfather years before, and he was telling a story, and his grandfather was enjoying a giant monster comic book, and he was laughing and telling Wyatt about the story about this monster from space, Urgu, whatever the heck his name is, Urgu. And then suddenly he appears and is attacking them, and Wyatt's grandfather was telling, he was with Wyatt's father, and Wyatt's grandfather was the chief and medicine man, and he used tribal magic and defeated, because he knew what this creature was, and defeated it, at least temporarily, with this using this tribal emblem of some kind. Okay, then we're back, and suddenly where they're at, that very monster appears and attacks, and they fight. They can't defeat it, blah blah blah. It turns out to be going back to some tribal legends, some kind of being that was fighting against the Great Spirit. It has no form of its own. It must borrow a form, but it cannot be a form that is being used. We find in this story here, there's a lovely, you can see that lovely painting there on that page too. And again, here, this full page depicting the stories. And it turns out when they did a seance to bring up Wyatt's grandfather, it was just that being again, but Doctor Strange saw through it. And then it has allowed it to come into the world in its own original form. And then it says it works from stories. It has to function from stories. It's how it gets the energy for its being, and how it has to be. So it has Wyatt using the special tribal emblem thing. I've forgotten what it was, and he recites a story from legend about strange warriors coming and have to defeat the hoop snake, and basically it makes it eat its own tail until it is finally nothing left, disappears, and they have defeated the thing. And then Fury, after they're done telling the story, and Fury said, that's a bunch of baloney. And he said, you don't believe me? Ask Doc. And of course it was Doctor Strange was also at that what do you call poker game, and he verifies it. Said in fact they had just come back from that particular adventure. So then they okay, I'll believe you, and then they shuffle the deck to deal the next hand of cards. And that is, I really enjoyed that book. It is some great artwork, as you saw, and I think it was a very well crafted story, and a lot of fun to read. It was so well done. The whole product is so well done and so enjoyable. So that's all I've got this time for Strange Tales. And I hope you enjoyed that. Please like, share, subscribe, leave a comment. I'd like to hear you comment about this great art and this great story. What you thought of it, or about what you like about the original Strange Tales, etc. Leave me a comment. And I'll leave you with that. And remember, comics are art.